And we are live. Welcome to the Red, White, and Rude podcast. I am Hodey Johns, guest hosting here for William Del Pilar. In case you're wondering, why did William lose all his hair? Was there some horrific accident that turned him into this shaved guinea pig product? No. His handsome face will be back next week. I'm just standing in as a guest host because this week we're going to talk about video gaming and go a little in depth with that. It's a little bit of background here. I'm a video game writer, editor, and occasional journalist. I do news, I do lists, I do reviews for a company called Valnet. Valnet is a company that does, they have several subsidiaries. We actually just recently acquired a quite tasty one, but you'll find my writings on Game Rant, The Gamer, and Dual Shockers. And so I mostly edit nowadays. You're not going to see too much original work from me, but I am obviously pretty plugged into video gaming. And so if we figure we're going to focus on this, we might as well talk about some in-depth, interesting news stories and maybe get a little extra insight in that. So that said, what I got queued up for you, if you're interested in it today, at the very end, I'm going to talk about how reviews work. Some of you might be fascinated, so there's a reason for you to hang on until the entire thing, because that should be pretty juicy. I have the inside track on kind of why reviews are the way that they are. I'm going to do a review of Expedition 33 toward the end. I'm going to talk a little bit of nepotism and a little bit of bad management from Ubisoft. I know that's going to shock absolutely no one who knows them as a company. We're also going to talk over the announcement of Cyberpunk 2 and the Black Panther game getting canceled. So I'm going to do that in the reverse order. Let's go ahead and talk about that Black Panther game right now. So if you're excited about Marvel games, this was going to be a single player, third person action combat game. Unfortunately, Black Panther has been canceled. Cliffhanger Games, the studio that was exclusively there to have this title to perform, to get us out of product, has also been shut down with it. So Cliffhanger Games, that studio, they are no more. That was actually led by Kevin Stevens. He's from Monolith Productions. His titles include stuff like Middle-earth, Shadow of Mordor. He was on Halo Infinite, God of War, and several Call of Duty games. They did announce why this is. They said it wasn't far enough along. And also, this is part of a greater strategy. In fact, they also, along with this, eliminated 300-ish employees from EA, just as EA at large and not just this company, as they announced that they're going to shift more on their heavy hitter titles. They want to have less projects floating out there. So they're going to focus more on Apex Legends, The Sims, and Battlefield. Just kind of the titles that when people think of EA, those are the games that they think of. So no Wakanda for us. What does this mean here? I'll talk a little bit about this. We want to hate the Overhead Studio a lot, but I will say this. One of the things that we need to give them credit for, limited credit, believe me, I'm going to dunk on them plenty, but the Overhead Studio does care about its reputation. When something's not far across along, of course, if they're trying to appease shareholders, for sure. But there's a reason why we hear more about cancellations as opposed to completely disastrous game releases. If you think about disastrous game releases, these 1 out of 10 games that manage it to actually make it to post-production, we actually see it. We're like, oh my gosh, how did a 1 out of 10 game actually get created? You know, that's kind of an annual event. It unites all gamers. We're like, how did this happen? 99% of the time, it's just getting canceled. And what this does is it actually protects that studio from being and makes them able to say, hey, listen, if we've created a game, it might not be a 10 out of 10 game, but we do guarantee at least some degree of quality with it. EA, for all its poor reputation that it has, usually doesn't give you a bug-filled mess. I can pretty well be sure that in game one, if I play the game, I'm at least going to be able to log on with my friends if it's a multiplayer game, have the experience, have the campaign. This cut was probably the right thing to do. Now, listen, I don't know how hard EA has been on these guys about getting content out here, but Cliffhanger's communication, was abhorrent. There have been no social media updates since 2023 when this project got announced. The importance of communication screams in investors' faces. They want to know where you're at, even if it's small, little updates, right? Like tiny little bit of lore pieces, especially with something like Wakanda. Hey, here's a new building we designed, right? You can always wait for the announcement trailer, or the release trailer to be like, hey, this is really going to come up, to show how it all fits together. But even if it's just a few blades of grass, I mean, people get thrilled by that. Most people my age that were excited about Fable will still remember that they detailed the exact number of leaves in each of the trees. It's a small update like that, but it's really encouraging to know that something's actually going to get produced. And with Cliffhanger Studios announcing absolutely nothing, I have no idea what it was. Now, some of the developers have taken to say that they did hit a recent internal milestone, but that's the phrasing that they're using, and it's so nondescript that could mean about anything. They could say the internal milestone was it's now playable. They could say, but not anywhere close to finished. They could say the milestone was we finished all the character models. I don't know what that means. So that really is not promising, especially since 2023 was 2 years ago. And we definitely should have some updates, especially from a studio. Literally their only title is this. This also does say something about Marvel itself as they try to find their footing after Endgame. I'm not going to say that everything they've done has been a flop. There's some things that have been popular among fans, but we're nowhere close to approaching the excitement as we were for like Infinity War, right? Like we're just in a different era right now. I do want to say this. I do think that a lot of times these bigger companies trust the wrong people when they create these little studios. They fill it with their own people, or they fill it with, people that loosely they think might understand the game, or they give it to just a bigger title and just say, man, I hope you guys do a good job. Look at a couple examples here. Like, everybody knows that Insomniac Studios is going to make a great Wolverine game that they're currently working on. I haven't seen any. There's been one very cinematic, I'll say trailer, but basically, Wolverine in a bar and just drinking. There's no combat in it or anything like that. But I know that game's going to be good because of what they did for Spider-Man, right? These guys are going to do a good job with it. And you look at what Larian Studios, makers of Baldur's Gate 3, Dungeons and Dragons trusted so many other studios to have their product. And we got a lot of bad Dungeons and Dragons games before they were like, you know what, these guys, they're not the biggest, they're smaller, but why don't we give them some trust? Because the games they make, in this case, Original Sin, Divinity 1 and 2, are such great high quality games, and they do understand the style that we're looking for. Find a studio that understands the style, still has a lot of passion, and who cares if it's a AA or even single A studio? At least in that case, you're going to get a good game. This was always kind of a boondoggle from the start when you set up these studios, you staff them with who knows what, and you hope that they all have like a coalesced vision. Probably not the way to do it. I'm going to go ahead and make a prediction here that details more than just about what might happen with Black Panther. They've still got an Iron Man game they're working on. They've announced 2 other Marvel projects that they're keeping a secret. Well, why keep them a secret? This can work sometimes, these secret releases, but games like Oblivion that actually do well after being like kind of surprised, announced, and released, but that's really rare. Oblivion also was already like a treasured game. So when that remaster came out and everybody ate it up and it was a big surprise, we already knew it would be a welcome surprise because the fan base was already there for it. In this case, people aren't out there playing Black Panther games. We've never heard of Cliffhanger Studios. This Iron Man game, I hope it's well liked, but it's not a slam dunk. Motive Studio, which is in charge of it, has not published any information about this on their social media since April 9th of 2024. That's over a year. And their post was a reply to somebody else asking where it's at. It says to check their blog. I did some Googling. If that blog exists, I can't find it. They don't care enough to put it on their bios or anything like that. Something for me to click and find where the update is at. I'm going to give a 50-50 on this Iron Man game ever getting released, and I'm going to go ahead and put in doubt either of those other two projects being completed. It's relatively cost neutral to try and explore a game and a franchise. The reason it's cost neutral is because investors will come and show up and be like, oh, cool, you're experimenting with something. And so even if you cut ties then, hey, you still got the money from the investors. It didn't pan out into, a pre-release production. We're not going forward putting a lot of work into it. And so my guess is those two games may never see the light of day. I hope I'm wrong. I want Marvel to succeed. They occasionally have some great ideas. And believe me, as a comic book kid and fan, there's a lot of unexplored stories still in the Marvel universe that haven't made it to either the cinematic universe or the gaming universe. And I really would like for those to succeed. There's some cool gameplay concepts there that are just waiting. But people aren't really excited for this anymore. We had an Avengers video game that was a live service mess and just bombed. And I am worried about what's going to happen with more of these Marvel games, especially if EA is in charge of either creating, outsourcing, or whatever with these studios. We really want to find a studio that is consistent, that does a good job, that does good work, even if they haven't done Marvel games before, something where they seem to understand the gameplay concept and they really put out their best work. So it's that's just something to look for. My thoughts on that one. Next one, Cyberpunk 2. Speaking of games that are in pre-production, and they're actually calling it Cyberpunk 2, by the way. That was just announced. It was a placeholder title. They had it codenamed Project Orion, and now they started calling it Cyberpunk 2. And that still may be a placeholder title, but the studios went ahead and said, we're just going to call it Cyberpunk 2. So that's what we'll call it. All right. CD Projekt Red has announced that they are moving that sequel into pre-production. Less than 100 people working on it, but they will start working on it as of May 2025. So it being June 1st, the time of this recording, and who knows when we go live, that's what we'll have. Some work at least being done in that area. Now, this development team is actually going to be led by CD Projekt Red North American teams based in Boston and Vancouver. So that's actually something that we should know about there, because this is not they're expanding. They have many studios. This is, of course, a foreign company. And so them actually expanding or starting with their North American teams may change the outlook of this game, something to think about. There is a new setting for this game. So those who love Night City, you're actually not going to go back to Night City. This is from what they say, to quote the creator of not only the original Cyberpunk universe, but somebody who is involved with the sequel, Mike Pondsmith, says he's looking for a Chicago gone wrong. That's the quote there, suggesting something maybe darker and even more dystopian than Night City. We'll see what his vision of that is. Obviously, when you think Chicago, you do think of kind of some mob stuff, some corrupt police officer stuff, maybe. We'll see what he's going for there. So the way these video games get released, I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, but we're probably shooting around for year 2030 on this one. If you're in pre-production starting now, it's going to take 4 to 6 years. So 5 years from now would be about 2030, could be possibly 2029. I would think actually closer to 2031. We'll see. Listen, Phantom Liberty, the expansion for Cyberpunk, was a success. The expansion alone sold over 10 million copies. This helped the franchise kind of get that. This was a big test run. Are people wanting this still, especially after the disastrous release of Cyberpunk 2077? Are people still excited for any expansions, any new stuff in this game? Would they actually come back? And the answer is yes. People came back and they said, yeah, maybe you fumbled the ball on the snap, but we're going to stay until the fourth quarter, and in this case, they were rewarded for their efforts. I played Phantom Liberty personally. The game still had It is still nowhere close to what they promised, of course. They were showing wall jumping and all kinds of cool stuff. If you look at those early gameplay trailers and you were to play it today, it's their feature missing for sure. And then as a story, so one of my jobs in anticipation for this game is they were like, every citizen is going to have a whole life to live. Right. We're going to craft each citizen. They're going to have a schedule, a work schedule, sleep schedule. You can follow them around. They eat at the same times, whatever. Like each citizen's going to be its own person. And so my job early was going to be to find a citizen, follow them around, and create this database for all these citizens that you could follow around Night City. It turned out that was very boring. They did not do that. The NPCs just kind of walk around sometimes from place to place, just back and forth for eternity. Most of them either never sleep or sleep way too frequently or all the time. They are not individually crafted. Their names are auto-generated. And in fact, their clothing, their looks, their style is all auto-generated. You will still walk by a curb and see 8 of the same characters waiting in a mob. They still behave the same way when you shoot a gun in the air. There's some that they've actually added, some will actually like shoot back at you, but whenever they run away, it's all in that same like straight line, like ants, you know? So this is a game that still, as far as a first-person shooter goes, I mean, with Doom: The Dark Ages out, there's no reason to be playing Cyberpunk 2077 unless you really love the world. Now, my job isn't to re-review what Cyberpunk 2077 is. That's not my goal, but I did want to kind of start there so that we kind of create a ground layer of what this is and what we can expect for the next expansion for Cyberpunk 2. So a majority of their resources are still in Witcher 4. This is actually going to reflect something that happened the first time with the first Cyberpunk. So we have to kind of hope this isn't a mistake they made from the first time. They had a small number of people start off the pre-production. Same thing as with Cyberpunk 2, right? But the bulk, even when they were like, hey, we've moved on to work about this, Witcher 3 has been released, we actually found out later that a majority of the people that were assigned to work on Cyberpunk 2077 were actually still working on The Witcher 3. Now, Witcher 3 is a Game of the Year award winner. However, I gotta stress this, that game on release still had a lot of issues. Combat was not fun or balanced. It's in a better place now. But, I mean, it was largely carried by this world, right? And these NPCs that you'd interact with. And they were just, all these side quests were brilliantly acted and scripted and fun to do. And it was the world kind of carrying a lot of poor gameplay. And so there was a lot of fixing up that The Witcher 3 actually needed. And so over the next, not just months, but several years after The Witcher 3's release, CD Projekt Red threw all of their development power behind this, even while they announced that Cyberpunk 2077 was being worked on. At the moment, we're looking at something very similar for The Witcher 4. The rest of CD Projekt Red may not come over to see what's going on with Cyberpunk 2 until somewhat late into the pre-development, planning, scripting process, right? And they're just coming in to be like, all right, what are we working on? Oh, I guess this is what we're doing. And we just have to hope that they still get a lot of time after that point, unlike their first game, to say, all right, let's spend a few years with this ironing things out, as opposed to really crunching at the end there. So we'll see. I do believe they will learn from their mistakes. If they release another buggy mess of a game from the same franchise, then they're going to get the reputation of one that even if you play, you're not going to want to pre-order. And that's a huge part of the sales condition and the positive reviews and the hype and everything like that they're going to want to get going. Gamers love CD Projekt Red's products and they hate their practices. So this is a company that promised no crunch. Jason Schreier was like, no matter what. And they said yes. And they went back on that. And in fact, had the nerve to say, listen, I'm telling you now, no crunch, so that if I crunch my employees later, I'm going to look really stupid. They crunched their employees later. He even said in the announcement, I'm prepared for the backlash. I don't know if he was prepared publicly for the backlash because it really did hurt the studio quite a bit. But, here we are. It is what it is. Listen, The crunch culture is all across video games. Their promise to not crunch, even if they broke it, is somewhat valiant. And we do have to recognize that unlike many video game studios, their developers actually receive a share of the proceeds from these games. So this isn't necessarily like the worst company on planet Earth, but it is one that has an issue with promises. They also promise the gamers, hey, we'll release when it's ready. I remember this announcement, and it's like releasing when it's ready, this promise of this perfectly polished game. And we were so like, you should have heard the standing ovation. It's still out there online if you want to look it up, when that announcement came up on the screen. Like, yeah, take years, take decades if you need to. Give us the best game of all time, if that's what you can do. Of course, they went back on that promise as well. They released a game that was in terrible shape and took a long time to fix. Now, they did fix it over time. It's still not anywhere close to what they had promised that it would be, but it's a little bit better now. My big worry for them, probably my biggest worry for them, is they're biting off a lot more than they can chew. Let's talk about games that they've announced that aren't Cyberpunk 2. Witcher 4 is something they're going to be working on. They promised a new Witcher trilogy. They're remastering the original Witcher. They are working on with Netflix on an exclusive game, and they're doing a multiplayer game that's for now called Sirius. All of these announced before Cyberpunk 2. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 other games. And actually, one of those is a trilogy, so 6, 7, depending on if you want to say they're working on all those games at once. But let's say 5 for now, other games that they're going to be working at, and also working with CD Projekt. Cyberpunk 2077 2 at the same time. They didn't work on Witcher 3 and Cyberpunk 2077 at the same time. Well, one came at great expense to the other. And so that was just 2 games. If you don't juggle those very well, and now you've got 5 games, I don't know if that's something that you want to see. They are outsourcing this work to other studios, but some cases, but I don't know that that's a good idea either. We can ask Rockstar what happened with Grand Theft Auto, or DICE what happened with Star Wars Battlefront, when you say, yeah, we'll publish your game, just let's find somebody else to kind of produce it. Listen, you're just remastering the stuff that's already there. How hard can it be? Well, they proved that can be an absolute nightmare and can significantly derail the game franchise. Now, Grand Theft Auto, of course, is still going to receive the same level of anticipation. Star Wars Battlefront, that may be dead forever, and that's a Star Wars title. And Cyberpunk, you've got exactly 1 game with 1 expansion to your name. This is a fragile franchise, regardless of what we might think. If the next one's bad, we probably aren't looking at a Cyberpunk 3, even if they kind of try to fix it up. We'll see. As a first-person shooter, these games to me aren't all that great, but I don't want to speak for the studio. Really, the reason you buy these, a CD Projekt Red game is for the world, the environmental storytelling. Night City was one of the best locations in all of video gaming. It still is, and I stand by that. It is one of my least favorite games of the year, even after it was in a fixed state. I still kind of found it bland as a shooter, but it does have good storytelling, and so it's more about the world than anything else. So really, where we're keeping our fingers crossed on this one, if you're a fan of CD Projekt Red and their game releases, you're willing to take some shoddy gameplay, right? Something that's just kind of a cut below what other gamers are doing. The trade-off is you really want that story to connect, and you really want that world to be there. This is what sets the fans of this franchise, of this studio. This is what they're looking for. And so we're going to hope that they can pull it off once again, and really, especially as they're setting the groundwork right now, that dystopian Chicago style universe in the Cyberpunk world is going to be cool. Let's hope. Third piece of news that we wanted to talk about, Charlie Guillemot is returning to Ubisoft. That last name sounds familiar. Yves Guillemot is the CEO of the company, of Ubisoft, and Charlie is his son. Charlie has also worked with this studio before. He stepped down in disgrace following the controversial release of his project, Tom Clancy's Elite Squad. If that doesn't sound familiar, it's because it doesn't exist anymore. It was only up for about a year. It was a 5v5 gacha game that kind of auto-played for you a little bit, and it bombed badly. And listen, for a gacha game, it's really bad, especially because these games only take a few whales to really soup things up. Look at game studios like Activision Blizzard. They're still making the bulk of their money, their revenue, not off Diablo 4, not off StarCraft 2. They're making it off of Candy Crush, right? Like, this is that making a gacha game is a huge moneymaker. And even kind of the worst gacha games usually tend to exist for a long time because it's kind of easy money. At this point, the fact that this guy failed something that we could say is kind of easy and was set up for him is not good. And he did step away. He got into a bunch of blockchain stuff, which didn't work out for him either. And now he's back. People are talking. He's co-leading something, so his role, he's not developing a game, thank goodness, but he's going to be on something called the Transformation Committee. It's aimed at overhauling the company's internal operations, adapting to industry trends, is what they say. In truth, they're doing this because Tencent is investing heavily in the company. That name may not sound familiar unless you understand the business end of video games. Tencent is, they acquire big portions of gaming studios or specific titles, and usually for very secure reasons. I actually have a list here of Tencent games because it's important to kind of know: Clash of Clans, League of Legends, Roblox, Fortnite. Now, here's the thing. What you can think about with all those games, one is they're not fundamentally different. There's no Clash of Clans 2. There's no League of Legends 2. Roblox 2, there's no Fortnite 2. These are all just games that are kind of money makers. They're a lot of microtransactions. They don't only do microtransactions, obviously, but that's certainly something that they push for. Many people will know that if you play Assassin's Creed games, those have microtransactions in them now. Far Cry, same deal. Rainbow Six, I guess we can see for that. Those are the companies. So Tencent is actually that 25% stake that they're taking. Far Cry, Assassin's Creed, and Rainbow Six. These are kind of the largest things that Ubisoft is working on here. They're much larger than like Prince of Persia or Ghost Recon or Just Dance. These are kind of their big titles, and Tencent wants a big slice. So Charlie Guillemot, having him there, he's going to kind of be overseeing that kind of transition of ownership to make sure that maybe the old team understand, or the new team understands what the old team has been working on. There's an upcoming Ubisoft Forward event where we will hear more details. I'm sure it will sound more positive, and it's, of course, directed towards gamers and directed for a lot of hype. It's not there to give us all the business end, but I'm sure we'll hear more about things that they have planned in the works, but we'll see what Charlie and the new team have decided to work on. So Ubisoft has had some recent challenges, I'll say. Now, as far as United States sales, Assassin's Creed Shadows, despite coming out in March, is still the second highest seller in the USA. So this is what Tencent, I'm sure, is looking for. Assassin's Creed Shadows, by all accounts, whether gamers or critics, people were like, it's fine, but it sells, right? Same thing if it's League of Legends, right? Fine, but it sells, right? People buy it. There's no big overhaul here, but it's fine and it sells. That's exactly what Tencent is looking for. They want consistency, and so it's very easy to make, I don't want to say it's easy to do the entire thing, but the formula for an Assassin's Creed game or a Far Cry game is very simple. That is probably the biggest criticism with all these games, is not that they're not fun, but they're kind of the same game that they released last time. It's almost like the Madden of the action adventure gaming universe, right? That this is what they specialize in. And you know what you're going to get every year. There's not going to be a big, shake up. We might hope for it, of course. They'll announce some things. It's the first time ever that we've done this, that, or the other, and it doesn't really make a difference. But this is kind of what Tencent wants. Now, on one end, Charlie Guillemot's hiring makes a lot of sense. If you run a video game studio and you say, this is what I want the guys who take over to be doing, then your son makes a lot of sense, because he's not just introducing, like, a developer doesn't make a lot of sense because they're very hands-on and they're very within the formula. Charlie Guillemot is somebody who understands the meta formula, the above the top down look, right? Who's somebody who's like, what is my dad going for? And he will be able to explain that to this other company. Here's the problem with that. While I say that like it's a good thing, people generally don't like Yves Guillemot. They don't like his visions. And so bringing your kind of disgraced son back to oversee this because he understands your vision is kind of bad on bad. People don't like the current Ubisoft formula, and then having his son go in and make sure that that formula doesn't change as it transfers ownership teams is not the guy that you really want to see doing this. We gamers are just going to say, why, oh, why are you doing this? How about somebody who's going to inject a little excitement to these franchises, something like that. So liberation is something we need to talk about over consolidation. And this is just a general, I'm going to expand this to kind of talking about the industry at large. Listen, Expedition 33 is a game I'm going to talk about here in just a minute. But this was a bunch of Ubisoft developers who got sick of Ubisoft's totalitarian and authoritarian rule within, they're stifling creativity. They don't want anything new. They don't want anything different. They want to produce the same old thing that they keep producing over and over again. People can tolerate it. I mean, like I said, Assassin's Creed 2 still selling quite a bit here in the United States. I mean, it's impressive, really. But it is kind of sad because you do look at it and you're like, people are just buying it because it says Assassin's Creed, not because there's anything necessarily all that exciting about it. And then there's this game, Expedition 33, which is just a couple of people from the studio, and they go out and what right now would be the game of the year, right? Like they produce that. And so what you need to think about is that Ubisoft has that talent in-house to be producing something that's game of the year. And they have a production studio to make the excitement and hype around it even higher than what Expedition 33 is. So they've got the talent, they've got the power, but they don't have the will. And when you consolidate like this, especially what Tencent does, they consolidate. You can say tons of good things about cash generation in all of these. Far Cry, Assassin's Creed, Clash of Clans, League of Legends. I mean, Fortnite, these are profitable franchises making a lot of money, but it's consistent money, and it's not because they ever do anything exciting. It's just the same game with a few new skins, a few extra characters here and there. And so if you're wanting to see a shakeup with any of these franchises I mentioned, and honestly, that's the biggest pushback gamers have when these games get released, unfortunately, we're probably looking at something that's quite the opposite as ownership transfers to Tencent, that Ubisoft is going to want to appease them. And so they're going to be even more committed to do the same old thing over and over again because people keep buying it. I think Madden's the best comparison I have here, and it's really a shame when I now talk about Expedition 33 to think of what could have been. Let me do a quick review on Expedition 33. It's like I said, probably the game of the year, and I won't lie, this is probably the best game I've ever played in my entire life. There's this meme that goes around with the burger for video gamers where it's like, what's 10 out of 10 characters? Story, graphics, music, environment, like all that together, right? Like what's a 10 out of 10 experience? And you would be hard pressed, even as somebody who doesn't think it's the best game of all time, to say that every one of those elements isn't a 10 out of 10. It might not be the best game for you. Of course, we all have different tastes. It's like pasta shapes, right? Pleasing gamers is very difficult. We all like our favorite pasta shapes. But overall, we can agree on certain flavors, and in this case, this flavor is going to be pretty good for everybody. That it's hard to knock at it, except for if you just didn't appreciate the direction that they went in. As far as a gameplay loop goes, they take the Persona 5 JRPG's, menu system and combat system. For those who don't know, the JRPG, Japanese role-playing game, is usually a turn-based system. And what it is you take a turn, you attack. Whoever's next takes their turn, they attack. Maybe it's the enemy, they take their turn and attack. You line up against each other and just kind of one at a time. Whose turn is it next? Okay, they throw out a big flashy spell or punch or sword or whatever it is, and and then it goes from there. I am not a fan of that style. In fact, I found it a little stagnant because I'm just kind of like, boy, I'm just selecting the same spell, whatever the most powerful spell is, and then using that until I run out of it. And then if I, can't cast that anymore, then I cast the second most powerful one or whatever my strongest attack is that I can. And it feels a little boring, but what they've done is they've added different kinds of defense mechanisms: dodging, parrying, gradient parrying, when it's their turn to attack. So I'm no longer just waiting and hoping my guys survive. I have an active role in their survival, even when it's the enemy's turn. And even if after I select the right move, the move that I've set up for, there are, you press a button at the right time to get the most damage out of that move. And so it's a combination. There's an action, there's a timing thing that you need to get down with these to really get good at this game. And it's really welcome, especially when before it was just menu selection. The other cool thing about this menu selection kind of experience is you're designing these builds. And I went through an evolution on all 5 of the characters for exactly the way I wanted to build them and how I designed them, what their main moves were, what their powers were, what their expertise was, and what I featured with them. And I found that different stages in the game, I was just prepared to do different things. Different moves made sense to me. And so there's a lot of encouragement of exploration, of being like, man, if this is the way you want to stomp the game, this is a great way to do it. You could turn any one of these characters into a damage dealer. If you get enough of your Lumina points, you can get enough to make anybody a support hero. Of course, there are some people will feel that are better than others. Each of these characters is 100% distinct, but giving them a different weapon changes the entire way you play the character. Giving them a certain weapon or a certain build or whatever it is, it's so much better than the classic JRPG model where you're really just taking the sword with the highest plus attack on it and then pairing that with, okay, well, it's a sword, so they're good at slicing, so I guess I'll invest in strength. This is totally different. The luminas that you get to level up aren't just stats, although that is part of it. You will be investing in something like luck, agility, things like that. But the bulk of the build is actually going to be these luminas, which do different things. Some of them kill you at the battle start, but if you pair them with other luminas that deal damage every time you die, then it's actually one of the best builds in the game. There's some builds that reward you for having full health or next to no health, or some that'll give you certain buffs automatically at the start of combat. And it gives you reason to go out and farm, if you will, attack these guys if you want. But it's an enjoyable process, and you really do get excited when you get the next cluster of Lumina points. You just kind of go, I can't wait to build this guy into something either different, reset all my Lumina points, which you can do at any time. Or you say, I've got this next big thing, and get that investment, and now all of a sudden, instead of attacking once, I'm attacking twice every turn. I'm getting to exceed a damage threshold at some point with some of these. It's just a really exciting build and gameplay thing that, while the game is technically a JRPG, it's a lot better than any other JRPG out there on the market. If you're a Persona 5 fan, you're going to love this. And I would say if you're not a Persona 5 fan, this is the one thing that may get you on board with it. We talk about graphics, the visual style and presentation. This is one of the highest quality artwork games I've ever seen. This is right there with, I would put it as better than Elden Ring personally. If you play this on the console, it's actually a lot better than Elden Ring. Elden Ring still has kind of those pop-in issues that you're dealing with. And if you play in anything but performance, if you try best graphics mode, all of a sudden your game's slow into a crawl in Elden Ring. In Expedition 33, it looks great, it plays great, it's smooth. I've played through this game 3 times now, and I have had no crashes, so technically runs great, great frame rates, but the look of it, the artistic style of it, gorgeous. and harrowing in the same way that you would see monsters in games like Soulsborne games. You would see all these different kind of mutated creatures, and you would be in these environments where there's things floating in the air. But Expedition 33 does something that most of these games don't do. Whereas most of those games have creepy monsters because they're creepy and it's fun to fight creepy monsters. There's a reason behind each of these. This isn't just environment, it's environmental storytelling. So the visual team did a great job communicating with the writers to say like, hey, this is kind of what's going on in the meta story. Oh, okay, so that's why that's floating in the sky there. And you don't get all those answers until kind of close to the end of the game. And I found even as I was playing through the third game, myself going, oh, that makes sense why that monster is designed that way or why that piece of environment is that way. But it's colorful. It's splashy. When it's dreary, it's bleak dreary. When you're in a meadow with blue butterflies, it's such a color saturation. And so there's a good variety of tone here as well when we talk about the graphics and the visuals. You're really going to love most of these visuals if you do play it. Sound, amazing. You know, when you're clanking swords and you hear those swords clash, it sounds great. When you're running around in the footsteps and you listen to what's going on in the environment. If you stand by the edge of a cliff and just listen, you hear something. You'll hear things that are story related, or you'll just hear, you know, birds if there are birds, crows if there are crows. You will hear, you know, people talking if there are people talking, and whispers. The music, unbelievable. If you do not do anything else, if you just say, I'm never going to pick up Expedition 33, this music is wonderful. It is, it's French, it's operatic. It's like opera meets techno at some points. It's so hard to describe. I haven't quite heard anything like this, but it's beautiful. It's haunting when it needs to be. Again, much like with the visuals, the range of emotion here is incredible, and it's something that I think most people are going to enjoy. The narrative, well written, engaging. There aren't really plot holes here. I find that there are even things that as a gamer, when you first start playing this game, you might be like, why is that happening? That's so annoying. And then the game actually is like, isn't that annoying? Don't you dislike that? Let's talk about that for a little bit. So it's not like you're annoyed because the game didn't want you to be. You're annoyed because the game did want you to be. You know, when you're upset with something or sad, the game knows, right? You're supposed to be sad about this. If you're confused, yes, that confusion is intentional. They want you to be lost for a moment, to feel what these characters are feeling, you know? And so you actually go on that full journey with them. It's very adept. It's very deft, you know, it's really, and there's some complicated storytelling here. Like I said, I'm playing through the game, a fourth time actually now. But those first three playthroughs, I was still establishing quite a bit. And I'm sure there's more things I'm going to discover in my fourth playthrough that I go, oh, right, that's what's going on here. It's very layered. And so this story it's very character driven. These people are people. They don't do things that are out of character very often. Of course, they do sometimes because we human beings are all inconsistent. And so we kind of come to find out, why are they inconsistent? Why did that character do that thing when I wouldn't think they would ordinarily do that thing? And they don't just leave that as a mystery, like, people are complicated, who knows? That there's a dive into all these people. It's very exciting to talk about. These are characters, all 5 of them, if you play this game, will become very beloved to you. You know, you will really, well, I guess 6, characters will become very beloved to you. You will be thinking about them when you're not playing the game and quoting them, and they're just a lot of fun. The overall, and then most importantly, just what's the overall entertainment value of this like? Listen, it is on Xbox Game Pass for free. Well, I guess with your monthly subscription. Of course, it's in a bunch of other places too. I think it costs roughly $44. There's a deluxe version, which has like a flower suits, which are, I would actually recommend against them. I think the base character designs are kind of the best ones. But yeah, you can pick this game up for really cheap and get hundreds and hundreds of hours of value out of this. It's one that you will want to play with your friends. I feel bad for anybody that plays this game and doesn't have the friend group to talk about this game with other people. Everybody has that experience sometime. They're like, have you played this game so we can talk about it together? If you're the guy in your friend group who has played Expedition 33 and nobody else has played it, you will become the annoying guy who will become an evangelist for Expedition 33. This is one of just my favorite, like I said, probably what I think may be the best game of all time when all is said and done. It is certainly my favorite of this year by a long shot. And I think it's one that most people should give a chance, even if you're not really interested in the genre. Listen, if you don't have Game Pass, what are you doing if you're at all interested in video games? I mean, in 1 month, they had Doom the Dark Ages and Expedition 33. That's going to get you through the entire summer of worth of fun right there for us working folks, right? Like just those two alone are gonna give you more than the value of the pass itself in entertainment. Highly recommended on both. Since that's my review of Expedition 33, let's talk about how reviews work real quick. As somebody who's been an industry insider for a while now, I wish that we'd be more clear about this process. It's one that there's still a lot of smoke and mirrors and conspiracies about. And I think that people that are very anti-game review make a lot of miscalculations, as well as a lot of people that are like, oh, the game reviews are accurate. Both of those require a lot of asterisks. So let's talk about that. So how the process works is we'll get a game code. And they'll say, we'd like you to review the game. And I will open the package that they've got here. And usually I can tell right off the bat if a game's going to be good or not. Because what they'll say if a game's going to be good is you can talk about anything. Sometimes there's a spoiler plot point that they want to excite people to buy the game for, right? If there's a big plot twist, they don't want us putting that in our review. It's sad that has to be spoken to professional reviewers, but I'm sure that there are some who, unless they sign an agreement saying we won't talk about this, that, or the other, that things are going to be, that most people would have the common sense. But again, I can't guarantee it, so I do understand why that goes in there. I can tell it's going to be a bad game if this section is huge. I have absolutely pulled up a video game code before, downloaded the game, opened the game files, looked at what I'm not allowed to talk about, and thought, what can I talk about? If I'm not allowed to judge this scene that is really stupid plot-wise or really buggy or, unfinished environment, and they're like, yeah, don't judge us on that. We're not done with it yet. Okay. But what do I say? I can't guarantee to people that it's going to be good or bad. I'm just not supposed to judge it at all. And so when this code comes into the studio, great. When it's a big gaming studio, we will give this to somebody who is interested in that franchise, genre, setting, that gameplay experience. We want to give it its best possible advantage. So, for example, I have played through Elden Ring. I don't love it to death like many other people do. I am not such a fan of FromSoft that I'm like, everything that is amazing. I loved Sekiro. I thought that was the game of the year that it won. So I have no problem with FromSoft games. I just know that I'm not their biggest fanboy. And so this code will go to the biggest fanboy. This does explain why some of these franchises always seem to get 10s, even when the people who play, the gamers at large, are kind of like, I think this is more a 7 to 10 or 8 out of 10, when all these companies are giving it 9s and 10s instead, because it goes to somebody who's the biggest fan of the franchise already. When we get a Legend of Zelda code, we know who that's going to. The biggest Legend of Zelda fan of all time, the guy who's been playing the games before, and somebody who actually enjoyed the games before. One of the quickest way to get a bump off of being able to review games is to really not enjoy a game in a franchise and just say, I don't think this is for me anymore. One reason you're going to see games like, let's say, Assassin's Creed always seems to get 9 out of 10 is for this very reason, because Assassin's Creed has somebody at every studio who's like, man, I play those games. I'm a fan. I love that open world design that they have, the checking off all the boxes. I love the collection quests. I love all of it, right? And that guy is going to get the code. And if he all of a sudden says, you know what, I'm kind of done with this design, nothing dishonest has occurred, but he essentially is going to say, I don't need to be front of this line for this code anymore. And somebody who's not burnt out by the design will. And so that does mean that even if there's something that gamers want us to factor in, like burnout, it won't be factored into some of these reviews because we're writing it for somebody who's excited about the game. And we've given it the code to somebody who's excited about the game. But that does make their discrepancy for gamers at large and gamers who are excited about this particular game. There's going to be a breakdown there. And like I said, some of that's for safety, but some of that I understand why most people would say, hey, that doesn't sound quite right. I don't know if I like that. There can be a point. Now, nobody is taking bribes. I want to be really clear about that. This is kind of one of the stupidest things that I've heard, that people are getting paid to give a good review. There's a veiled threat, which I'll get to in a minute. But just to be very clear here, nobody's ever, like, well, I don't want to say ever. No, I'm sure somebody at some point has tried to pay for a review, somebody really stupid. But the threat is not, or the deal isn't give us a 10 out of 10 and here's $100, or give us a 10 out of 10 and here's $10,000. That's not happening at any game studio anywhere, even the one that you hate. And I'm sorry. But if you do see something that is out of sync like this, there is a little bit of a bribery without bribery process. I'm going to talk about Last of Us 2 for a moment and how this drastically changed the industry. Now, this was a very divided game. People either loved it or hated it. It didn't expand much on the Last of Us Part 1 formula, which was already a little outdated gameplay-wise, so it was kind of shocking to see when it happened. But if you gave this game a 9 out of 10, you ended up getting an email, a little bit of a, we think you should review the game again to maybe make it 10 out of 10. Now, they didn't say it, but the understanding is if you didn't do that, again, it's just an understanding. Nobody said this out loud, but you're not getting a game code for the next game. And a lot of these big companies, we bring in a lot of people with reviews. Now, I'm glad to be for one of the companies that does not. If you are familiar with, Valnet, if you're familiar with Game Rant, The Gamer, DualShockers, yeah, we do video game reviews at those, installments. But that's not the primary reason people are there. We do guides, we do lists, we do opinion pieces, right? Like that's more what we're there for. So we're not mainly for reviews, but there are some places that reviews are their bread and butter. And the idea that if you give something a 9 out of 10 instead of a 10 out of 10 and you don't get that next code, that's the way you've been reaching gamers is through reviews. Now, obviously, everybody, including these companies, can review a game after it comes out. They review it late, like a normal gamer would. I don't have early access to something, so I just review the game after it comes out. Those reviews are not as popular. And also, when they do consolidating for saying the game was reviewed at this, that's usually the roundup of the initial reviews and doesn't factor in at all any reviews that come in later. They talk about the reviews on release, and that generally tends to be the review score we talk about forever, unless we're doing something like Steam reviews or something like that. And that's why a lot of people do tend to prefer the Steam review percentage players who bought the game and enjoyed the game over what the professional reviews have been. And I totally understand why. That's not right. I do understand why some companies might feel some obligation to do this. Listen, if you release a bad game and I say this is a bad game and somebody else say, no, I think this was a great game, well, then it looks like IGN's going to be getting a code and we're not anymore, even though we were honest and they were just like, sure, let's say everything's really positive, IGN no longer, by the way, is the automatic, 8 out of 10 or better that they used to be. They've, because of this backlash, had some shakeups over there, but they're still an easy target to talk about why this phenomenon existed at all. And it's important that gamers understand this when they look at these reviews and what they are. What did this do to the industry? So Last of Us Part 2 really was a big shakeup. There's a lot of effort in this game. There's a lot of good graphic design. The story was atrocious and ham-fisted, and I loved Last of Us, and it just felt like one that if you liked the first Last of Us, they really didn't like you. And we can do better. Maddie Myers is a great opinion piece about this, about how we really did badly in trying to do diversity with Last of Us, that people deserve better representation than what Last of Us Part 2 did. But this is a game that won Game of the Year in 2020. Now, the issue is Last of Us Part 2, some people that played it recognized that it was a bad game pretty quickly. And when we got this code, and some of this has been released, but it was like, you can't review this, you can't review this, you're not allowed to talk about this, not allowed to talk about this. And the things we were allowed to talk about, like graphics, I guess, sure, that's 10 out of 10. But I'm really not allowed to talk about how, like, the knife goes through their leg when they wipe off the blood. Like, that kind of takes me out of the immersion a little bit. I'm really not allowed to talk about this. It's not even game breaking, but this kind of stupid plot point. Everybody makes fun of Call of Duty with the press F to pay respects. And this was press F to torture. Like, really stupid stuff that people would make fun of, but hey, you're not allowed to review it. So what can I do? I guess I can't review it, And what we saw was a schism within the industry. We saw people leaving these companies, at least viewers, right? Even if employees didn't, that viewers would leave these companies that just automatically gave stuff like this a 10 out of 10, and instead went to independent YouTubers and stuff, influencers that were like, hey, I'll be honest, here's my feelings about the game. All this stuff is good. This stuff was really not. And overall, it wasn't an enjoyable experience for me. And so what happened is in 2020 at the Game Awards, I remember talking with people and they were like, man, I didn't vote for The Last of Us Part 2, but I think it's going to win. And sure enough, it did. And I remember the very next year, the industry had been so shaken up that with It Takes Two, the conversations I had were almost exactly the opposite, that I voted for It Takes Two. I don't think it's going to win, though. But it actually did. And if we look at what has happened with reviews since then, how that shakeup has been important, this is the importance of decentralization. Before The Last of Us Part 2, we had Dragon Age Inquisition, The Witcher 3, Overwatch, Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, God of War, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, Last of Us Part 2. All big companies winning Game of the Year. Since then, we've had 4. It Takes Two. Elden Ring is the exception. Baldur's Gate 3 and Astro Bot, all smaller game studios that actually just put a lot of heart into their projects. And reviews are now better off because of this shakeup. It's not perfect. Obviously, all the stuff that I mentioned about how reviews work, that's still how they work. But things are at least better now that we have more independent and trustworthy people, and frankly, greater variety. When things are less centralized, you're going to get 2 different opinions. I want somebody who had a 1 out of 10 and a 10 out of 10 playing Last of Us Part 2 to both have their opinions counted towards the total. I want somebody who said, like, man, I think this is the worst game of all time, and I think this is the best game of all time, to make their case and explain why. And I think we are all better off for having that. When I'm able to say, hey, listen, I know that this person or outlet shares my taste in games, then I'm going to have at least some place to turn so I can say, I'm going to trust their review over these guys' review. And then you're actually going to be in a good place where you say, cool, now I know how the kind of review that I need. So that's just kind of how to find a good reviewer, things to look for, as well as some information about how reviewing has got to the state where it's at. I appreciate everybody and William Del Pilar for letting me stand in on this episode of Red, White, and Rude. Everybody, I really appreciate you tuning in, spending some time with me. We will return to William next week, and I'm sure you'll be very excited to see him. I know that I will. To all you who joined us, thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you again here on Grumblings Media.
Hey everybody, this is Big John from Grumblings Media, and I just want to say thank you for watching our content. If you want to support our efforts here at Grumblings Media, just smash the subscribe button right here, totally free, or just go ahead and consume more of our great content. Click either one of these 2 boxes.